All right.
So, how long are we going to talk?
However long you feel comfortable with, like I'm down to go as long as you want to go.
Less than an hour.
Less than an hour? All right, perfect.
Yeah, because I'm feeling absolutely exhausted. I want to
Okay.
just, I'd like
I
to
don't want
take
to
a nap.
exhaust you. I don't want to exhaust you, man. I need you to finish the book you're working on. All right. Well, I just wanted to say thank you first off. Your books have been extremely important to me. I've done, I think, some good work of helping to popularize them on Twitter or X, I guess we're calling it these days. Um, but when I first found your work, I was really coming from more of a like literary studies sort of perspective. Like I studied Russian literature and Russian in college, and was just very much mostly interested in literature, and slowly got interested in economics more from like a literary perspective, I guess. And in your one of your interviews about your biography, you described like going into or being interested in going into like musical composition, classical composition, and then finding a sort of aesthetic satisfaction in the study of economics. And I found that very inspiring personally because I feel sort of the same way. The appeal of Marx to me and other political economists like Veblen and guys like that, guys like yourself, was that they gave me the same satisfaction of like reading a great novel, especially like a great like satirical novel. And that's been sort of my interest in all of this is economics is sort of a outgrowth of literary satire and like the genre of the anatomy that like Northrop Frye would describe. So I think of you as like the greatest living satirist in the world. Like you make me laugh more than anyone in the whole world. So thank you.
Well, you understand where my mentality is at.
Yeah, yeah. Um, if there's any question I could start off with, I'm sure you're going to cover this in the book you're working on. I've been a longtime follower of your work, so I'm waiting patiently for the next book in the cycle on debt, covering the like Crusades and onward. Because that's particularly of interest to me from like a literary perspective on like let's say Christian hermeneutics or something like that. Like the translation of the Lord's Prayer was um, major thing for me, like the forgive us our debts and whatnot, tying all of this to like material economics really opened all of this up for me. So I believe you referred to like a specific school of the Catholic schoolmen who like come up with the justification for charging interest on debts, but under a different name, so it doesn't qualify as usury. I was wondering if you could go into like detail more so, like when specifically you would say this shift happened and like under what dispensation.
Well, funny you should put the question that way about literary discussion, because most of the discussions about economics in the 13th and 14th century, and that's when the schoolmen were coming up with their justification of interest, the best discussions were all of a literary character,
Of
especially
course.
by Dante. I mean, Dante describes, puts it all together and putting the usurers back in the seventh circle of hell,
Yeah.
along with and there was a kind of uh, meme of usurers putting them together with the sodomites,
Hmm.
and in the sense that they said lending is sterile. Lending does not produce an economic return for the borrower. The borrower has to pay the interest out of whatever they earn elsewhere. If it's the government borrowing money to go to wage war, then it has to levy taxes, and this reduces the population. If it's an individual who borrows from a usurer, then they have to cut back their consumption or lose their property or lose their economic freedom and fall into debt bondage. So it's the literary people that describe this, just like in Greek and Roman history. It's the literary writers that you get what a description of what was happening in the creditor landowning oligarchy that ended up stifling uh, Rome, but also in the 19th century, it was the literary historians that won the Nobel Literature Prize for writing about antiquity or were nominated. People like Carraro and others, they were viewed as literary historians. Economists don't talk about debt. They don't talk about finance. They don't talk about interest as or how it began at all, because it didn't begin in the private sector. It was the Catholic Church that created the and sponsored the first international banking in the 12th and 13th century, and they sponsored it because the Roman Church wanted to essentially take over all of Christianity, and the Crusades were waged mainly against Christians.
Of
Before
course.
the official crusade, the first real crusade was in southern Italy and Sicily, backing Robert Guiscard. The Catholic Church found, who are we going to get to kill the Christians that don't agree with us? Who are we going to get to fight the Germans, who wanted a decent, balanced church without all of the craziness and fighting against everybody who didn't agree with you? How are we going to fight against the Muslim territories? But most of all, how are we going to fight against Orthodox Christianity, the majority of Christianity? There were five patriarchies in the 12th century, patriarchates. Rome was the least important. The most important was Constantinople, then Antioch, then Alexandria, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
Rome. Rome was at the nadir. In the 9th and 10th century, the Catholic Church histories call it the pornocracy. Because it was
Yeah.
basically because it was just the local families of a wealthy Roman suburb in Tusculum sort of had controlled the church as their own personal set of sinecures for themselves. And they were so corrupt that you had Germans set out to try to reform it. And then they said, how are we going to get rid of the nepotism and the fact that the Vatican is captured by churches, basically so they could find either young women or boys to screw? And it was just the utter corruption that you read about these families. How are we going to make it some semblance of Christianity again? And they tried to reform. Well, after them came another reformer that this reform led to, well, in order to prevent an aristocracy from taking over the Catholic Church and making it a family business, we have to stop, not let the clergy and popes be married. Because if they marry, they're going to have kids. And if they have
Yeah.
kids, they're going to make them the pope. I mean, that's what happened from the 9th and the 10th century in Tusculum. You can find it all on Wikipedia, the Catholic Church histories of all of that. They're sort of embarrassed. But then, so that made Western Christianity, Roman Christianity, different from all the other Christian churches that permitted priests to get married.
Yeah, I mean, that used to be like you had to do that. That was like a way of demonstrating that you were like invested, I guess, in the community as well, that you were like a overseeing.
Sure, and the German reformers wanted to make the Christian church part of society, even playing a role in trade and even in the military. They wanted, to have a Christian community. That's not what the what it ended up. And they also, the Roman Church wanted to introduce this theory of the Trinity theory that basically said Jesus was the Son of God. He wasn't a human being, had nothing to do with being a political social leader leading opposition to the creditor class
Yeah.
of his thing. This is all about God. And the Catholic Church basically had been poisoned in the fourth and fifth century by two of the most evil theologians in history, Cyril of Alexandria, who based the Christian church on anti-Semitism because he wanted to drive out all of the Christians who weren't under his personal control, and most early Christians were Jewish. Uh, because that's
Yeah,
how
I mean,
it came out
naturally.
of. So he led pogroms against the Jews, in addition to killing Hypatia, who was the
Yep.
great mathematician. And he put in the Trinity idea and elevated the Virgin Mary to the
Hmm.
Trinity, knowing that that's the one thing the Jews were not going to go along with.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
woman as part of the
I
Trinity.
mean,
It was
I mean, it's
pretty
constant.
patriarchal being there. Being there.
Well, it's
Um,
like a constant refrain in the Old Testament where they're putting up the stack the idols to the Queen of Heaven and things like that, which becomes a major problem for like the reformers. That's one of the first thing I think Jehu does in the Old Testament is destroys all of the shrines to the Queen of Heaven.
right. And the other person, of course, was Saint Augustine,
Hmm.
who said, how do we get rid of the fact that in North Africa, he was the Bishop of Hippo in North Africa. How do we get rid of the fact that a lot of Christians don't like interest? And I'm representing the Roman Empire, and they don't like landlordship. And they all get together. And if there's a landowner that's a creditor and reducing people to bondage, according to the documents that have survived, they raid the guy's house and they freed the bond persons. So Augustine said, look, we've got to kill all of these Christians that are not pro-Romans. And he called them in, and you've got to give us their churches, not them. And he said, the important thing is we've got to get rid of the fact that the Lord's Prayer. We've got to get rid of the fact that they're all praying for forgive us our debts, because all the debts are owed to you, my constituency, the
Yeah.
Romans, the 0.1%. And so he said, it's not really about debt at all. It's about sin. And we're all born with sin. And there's nothing we can do. Just like you have to pay a debt, you have to pay for the sin. And you have to pay us, the church. And this led to a large argument, and there were Welsh, British theologians
The
who said,
Pelagians.
no, look, if we're Christians, we want to do good works for the world. You know, we want to use our money to help people, maybe to forgive the debt. Augustine said, no, no, I'm excommunicating you. You can't have anything. You can't have people spend their own money in helping the the society around them. You have to give to the poor. The poor are us. The poor are us clergy who are going and helping them. We get the money. And it's all about sin, and the sin is inborn. There is nothing you can do but go through us. And when you die, give us your estate so that you can go to heaven by giving us the money. I mean, he sounds like one of the today's Protestant evangelical leaders.
Yeah.
All of that. So this was
Well,
the Roman setting for that. This did not characterize the Eastern Christian
yeah.
Church. Orthodoxy. It was Constantinople and its the rest of the patriarchates, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, that were following pretty close to the original Christianity. The Romans said, we've got to fight against that in order to control the entire church and make it all celibate so that we can't have Tusculan people, the popes, giving all, making it a family
Yeah, yeah.
enterprise. And the question is, they had the same problem that they had that Stalin pointed to in World War II. He said, how many armies does the Pope have? Well, they didn't have an army. So what were they going to do? They found Norman warlords had come down and were raiding the lands of southern Italy, and the popes, especially the ones that I mentioned, said, "Well, we will." They found one, Robert Guiscard, and said, we'll give you the kingship of southern Italy and Sicily. Sicily was the key. If you promise to be our pledge fealty and become our vassal king, then we will back your divine kingship." And okay, he did. Became king. And a couple of decades later, you had another warlord, William the Conqueror. And they made a deal. William, if you want to take over Britain, there was a lot of people turned to Constantinople there. We will make you king. You have to promise to give us tribute and perform vassalage to us and do pretty much what we say. And William the Conqueror made the deal, became king, and it was the Catholic Church. Well, then they went into the Crusades really to take over the lands that the Constantinople held as Orthodox Christianity, especially in what used to be Yugoslavia, the whole peninsula, going the Balkans, going down
Yeah.
to Greece. They tried to grab that land. They opposed Germany because Germany was trying to arrange the German emperor was the Holy Roman emperor, and that upset Constantinople because they said, "Wait a minute, we're the Roman Empire. We're the new Rome. You're not the new Rome. You're old Rome. We're the real Rome.
Yeah, yeah.
You're just the sideline there." So the Catholic Church, the Romans, said, "How are we going to have these?" The British king and the Sicilian king, how are we going to fight against the Germans and Constantinople? And they need the sinews of war, money. They needed money. How are we going to raise money? That's when it was the church itself that created the banking class. Merchant bankers in northern Italy and right across the Alps, the Transalpine bankers, to make loans. And the Roman popes would go to the British kings, especially first King John and then his son Henry III, and say, we want you to go into debt to pay for an army to go and fight the Germans, who were somehow gained more control over southern Italy and moving into Spain, moving into Sicily, and so this led to a fight within the church, and you have wonderful documentation from the annalists at the time who wrote the annals, like Matthew Paris wrote all about all of this in great detail. And he was a friend of Henry III and the court, very well situated at the monastery, St. Albans, where he worked. So when Henry III was told, "Well, you have to raise money, and we'll make your son king of Italy as long as he pledges fealty and pays
Yeah.
us tribute, like you've been doing." Well, as you can imagine, the nobility fought back and said, "Wait, we don't want to pay taxes in order for you to go to war to fight for what the church's war. That's not our war." Well, this fight had already occurred in 1215 with the Magna Carta under King John. King John wanted to was looking for Vatican support to grab the land. He was called John Lackland, while Richard was fighting in Jerusalem, and so the barons got together and wrote the Magna Carta, and uh, John wrote something. Finally, they were going to overthrow him. So he said, "Okay, I'll agree with uh, all of your demands, and I promise that if I go back on my word, everything that I do, I say, will be negated in all of this. And I promise not to go and ask for any override." Well, as soon as they signed it, I guess he was the Donald Trump of his day. Or you could say Barack Obama. He immediately went to the Pope and said, "Excommunicate all of these people who will not let me, serve you." And the Pope excommunicated the barons who supported the Magna Carta. Well, in the 1250s, under Henry III, same thing happened. Henry III wanted to go into debt to fight the Germans in Sicily, and interest. And the church said, "If you disagree with usury, we will excommunicate you." And you can imagine the turmoil this caused in the church. Wait a minute, you used to excommunicate usurers, and now you're excommunicating the people who are opposed, who repose,
Yeah.
yeah, who are you're committing them who are anyway opposing it. What happened? Well, the answer was. When the Pope kills other people and does usury, it's not a crime, to quote Richard Nixon,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
It was all okay. And he put the theologians to work saying, how can we get rid of all of these critics of usury? Because the church is all about usury now. We have to create a banking class that will make its money by war lending to kings who will go fight our wars against people who will not accept a Roman leadership over the Orthodox Christian leadership and the German support of it, and the support of all of the rest. So that's when the churchmen came in, and as you pointed out, they said, "Well, we have a new word. It's not usury anymore. Let's call it interest." And they acted as if somehow loans were made not to wage war, not to fight people or kill people, not to serve the Vatican, but just doing mercantile trade. Because after all, most of the bankers had made their money in mercantile trade. They were merchant families and became merchant bankers. Well, they had a whole logic, which I know we were taught in history of economic thought when I was in college in the 1960s, and it was one of the problems were, well, foreign exchange dealing. That's not really interest. You're charging a fee for foreign exchange. And since these are international loans, you're changing from one currency into another. So you're allowed to make agio.
Mm. Take your bite.
Just like when you change money at the airport, they take a cut. But also, look at if a merchant banker lends money, then he's not able to use this to make profits for himself. So he's giving up the profits. And that's called lucrum cessans. You stop getting lucre money,
Yeah.
and they get compensated. And the rate was 22%. And if you're late, the late fee, saying, that he's really expecting it back and now he didn't get it, and who knows what plan he made to make another money, that's another late fee, 22%. That the church became a Visa card.
Yeah.
Basically just as much. So it ended up in England. We have all the documentation. It was 44%. that they had to pay. And that was all legitimized by the churchmen as interest. Well, you can understand if somebody's late in paying, it costs money. So what did the bankers do? Well, Matthew Paris and local bishops in England described just exactly what they did. Okay, you borrowed from us, you have to repay us. The repayment's going to be in just a month or two. Well, normally you'd make a loan and you'd pay at harvest time, because at harvest time, a year later, is when you'd uh, get the money to pay the loan. But the almost as soon as you made the loan, almost as soon, you'd run up into doubling the interest rates with the late fee. Uh, and the small print was easy to manipulate if you were a banker, and the popes all stood behind that. And basically, they got together and essentially reversed Christianity's long-standing opposition to usury. And this is after the Saint Augustine had changed the Lord's Prayer to forgive us our sins, for which you have to pay the church to get to heaven, instead of forgive us our debts that you'd have to pay to the Romans, if they weren't. If we're following Christian documentation. So it was the church that the Roman Church that created the banking class. Now it's very funny. There's hardly any of this emphasis on the church in economic histories, and a lot of it is because of the Jewish historians that have understandably, they're writing about the Jewish population and what it does, and they're concerned about the fact that there was so much anti-Semitism aimed at the Jews, largely
Mhm.
because some, even many Jews, if they're merchants, many of them did lend money. But Matthew Paris and others say, well, they weren't charging as much as the Christians. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
Christians immediately, if you wanted to get rid of the Jewish moneylenders, so they got Edward, Henry's son Edward, to exile the Jews from England, and Philip IV and France exiled them there. And so the Jews did not play a role in this creation of international banking. It was the church. And I'm just amazed how the Jewish historians haven't said this whole idea of identifying Jews with international banking has been used as an anti-Semitic accusation, when they did not play any role at all. The Vatican, when it was organizing the war loans to its vassal kings, did not borrow from the Jews. It would confiscate their money, it would grab it, but it wouldn't borrow from them,
Yeah.
and certainly would not pay interest. The role of the Jews when they were brought into England were the fact that they were the merchant class, and the warlords didn't know much about creating mercantile trade or production, because they were robbers, not merchants, and
Well,
not,
listen, they
not
they did a lot
business
of human
organizers.
trafficking. They
So,
did a lot of human trafficking, so they had some
right,
industries,
so it was the Jewish population that had the background uh, of organizing trade credit, along with the Islamic lenders. But of course, the Islamic people were not. The English and French chose to let the Jews in, but not the Muslims, basically. So,
that was making me think. I'm a big fan of Thorstein Veblen, which I know you're a fan of Veblen
yeah.
too, correct? He has this great little article, little essay he wrote called "An Experiment in Trusts," which is about the origin of like financial trusts with the Jomsvikings, like in their like slave trading corporations that they would establish. So I've been interested in like how this sort of, like you're saying, these Norman warlords and things are the ones who come into the, are like the, basically the reason why the Catholic Church develops this whole like ideology so it can justify the extraction of interest. Um uh, is this like why is it that none of this is like ever covered in like mainstream economics? It seems to lead to like right now we have like a massive rise in anti-Semitism, you could say, but it's really more like how Marx and Engels described anti-Semitism as like retarded political economy, because it's these people who are like genuinely trying to understand how the system of economics that we live under works and where it came from. But outside of you, there's really not many great resources to point people towards in order to like come to an understanding of the actual history of these things. And most of the people who are going to tell them that story are just going to tell them that like the Jews invented banking and that here we are.
Well, there's a reason for this tunnel vision. If you look at Bauer and all of the apologists to justify the charging of interest, they all do it on an individual basis. Well, if a lender makes makes a loan, then he's not able to spend this money on his own consumption. So he's giving up something, and he's being paid for being abstinent. That led Karl Marx to say, well, then uh, oh my God, I've had a long day. Then the Rothschilds should be the
Yeah,
most abstinent family in all of Europe to make this. Obviously, if you're a very wealthy banker, you don't really give up consumption because you have so much the money that you do get, the interest in others, you make new loans. You don't consume more with it. You make new loans, and you mentioned trusts and the creation of you're corporatizing essentially a monopoly, a business monopoly. Well, this again is because of the genius of financial organization. By the 13th and 14th century, you had the banking class decide, how can we extend the market for our loans? Well, I mentioned the fact that the barons of England first opposed King John's taking on debt uh, with the Magna Carta, and then Henry III. Again, the barons opposed it. And in most countries, most of the kingdoms of Europe, there was a kind of parliament of one form or another by the nobility that had the power to block the kings from taxing and saying you have to tax for the benefit of the country. And at that time, they didn't believe that going to war for somebody else's war was for the country. And so the kings were constrained. How could when a king took on debt from the international bankers, there were only two resources a king had. One was his own royal domain, that part of the land that belonged to him personally. Uh, and the royal domain was much less than the church domain. The largest landowner in almost every European kingdom in medieval times was the church, not the king. So the king had that, and the king had the power to tax, subject to parliamentary constraint. So the bankers got together, and remember, they're merchant bankers. They did foreign trade as well as war lending. And they said, well, customs duties, that you're able to charge customs, and that does not require parliamentary approval. They found the small print in the legal code and said, well, you can organize the import and export trade, so that you had the English kings, Edward onwards, being able to make a corporate group or partnership group out of England's wool trade. And the wool trade that England would export the wool to Flanders and the Low Countries to weave into cloth to send to Italy to be made into fashions, and the money would then go from Italy back to England to pay, via the Low Countries to pay for the wool, and that was the the triangular flow that you had in England, basically. So you had the way that kings were able to make money without taxing the people was to make royal corporations that would be monopolies. And by the 17th century, these extended to the East and the West India corporations. And the Bank of England was a corp. You'd create a monopoly. You'd give it to the company to raise money, and you'd say, you have to. We're going to sell it, and that's how we get the money to pay our foreign creditors. And so the creditors sort of helped the kings organize their fiscal finances so that they could raise enough money to pay the debts that they took on. Well, by the late 17th century, you had the leading kings who were all Catholics. The French, the Spanish, and the Austrians, the Habsburg kings, all kept defaulted again and again and again in the 16th and 17th century, because they didn't have even though Spain had all of this silver coming in from the New World, it just went right out. The silver was squandered on luxury spending. It was none of the money that Spain used was spent on developing its own handicraft industry. Instead, with all this money coming in, they taxed handicraft labor and other labor, and you had a huge emigration of skilled labor. And Adam Smith pointed to this. They'd go to places like England or to the Protestant countries where things were free. And the Protestant countries had a completely different form of political organization than the royal autocracies. The idea came from the self-governing cities of Europe, like Venice, for instance, or Genoa. And in these or Florence, you'd have these self-governing cities would elect leaders, and because they were a commune, all of the members of the community were liable for the debts that the community took on. So, and the banker said, "This is a wonderful idea. If only we could have nations act this way." Well, you had a lot of these communities in Holland and the Dutch countries, and these communities joined together to create Holland, and the idea of having a whole national government as a community where all of the citizens were liable for debts, not only the king. If a king ran into debt of Spain or France or Austria, then if he couldn't pay, the debtor, he went bankrupt, and the bank lost the money, because they didn't have any recourse to all the money in England, because the king didn't have the ability to tax all of the citizens. But the new parliamentary democracies became something that have been called fiscal states. The bankers took the lead in organizing these fiscal states, where the leadership in Holland and especially England after the 1688 revolution that brought King George to England, all of that became the new kind of political organization. And the result was that parliamentary democracies were able to borrow from creditors to get the military loans to defend themselves against the Catholic kings who were attacking them to take them over. And the Catholic kings couldn't raise war loans because they were no longer as creditworthy as the democracies that could tax the entire population against them. So this was it's very funny. Max Weber talked about the Protestant Revolution as promoting a financial class because of its ethic of personal gain, but it was really the organization of the fiscal state that made the big change for
Yeah.
what really emerged from all of this. And ever since England and the Bank of England and later the governments, English government and French government, tried to sell off. Make more, raise more money by selling off their monopoly of the slave trade. France sold the Mississippi bubble, based on plantation slave agriculture in Louisiana, and England had the South Sea bubble, which was based on they had conquered Spain and got the Asiento monopoly on the slave trade, and everyone thought that the slave trade was going to be the industry of the future, sort of like computers today, and that
Yeah.
became basically a bubble. So you have the financial sector helping governments, first of all, organize mercantile monopolies, organize finances, and where is the bankers of the 13th century backed royal autocracies because the church was able to protect the kings against nobility who would not want to pay the war debts they took on. All of a sudden, not suddenly, but by the 17th century, the banking class said, well, we really can't afford autocracies anymore because they go to war and they own, because they're an autocracy, all the debts are owned only by the king because the king controls everything, but there's the rest of society around him. So now we're going to switch to the opposite position we had originally, and we're going to back the parliaments that we opposed when parliaments were saying we won't pay the debts, because now, under the new fiscal states, parliamentary states, the parliaments are, we promise to pay the debts, because that was the condition on which they were able to borrow war loans from the banks, and so that made them more creditworthy, and they could borrow on better terms than the autocratic kings who really couldn't borrow at all. And that shifted the economic and the military advantage to Northern Europe because of the banking class. Well, what happened is the banking class basically created a new web of interconnections within Europe that took the place of what used to be the Catholic Church. Instead of the
Yeah.
Catholic Church creating a system of integration, largely economic and trade, and above all financial, with Europe, by creating this financial class, what they created became the new organizer of the system of integration that shaped Europe, and it's gone right down to the present day. The banking class worked through government and has backed governments who promote creditor interests. Because if a government doesn't promote creditor interests, then nobody will lend to it. And because it's not creditworthy anymore. And when
Yeah.
it goes to war, it's not going to be able to get as much money as the other groups, and wars fought by material money and by paying mercenaries, etc. So that's sort of the big theme of my book. The title that I've come up with, A Political History of the West's Financial Takeoff, from the Crusades to World War I. And I'm working on the final chapters and rewriting the chapter summary now.
Amazing. I can't wait to read it. If there's one last thing I could ask you about, I guess we'll go to like current events sort of stuff. Because I was
Okay,
thinking,
very briefly, because I mean,
very
we've
briefly.
summarized this. I don't want
Yeah.
to strain your audience's attention. We can always
Okay,
do
okay.
something more on these others, but tell me
I
your
just
question.
wanted to, I just wanted to throw this by you because I just read your interview with Ben Norton about the tariffs and things like this. There's a
Uh-huh.
great Veblen quote where he says like all business sagacity reduces in the final estimation to a judicious use of sabotage. Um,
Uh-huh.
would you describe like this, that basically what's going on is just an attempt to sabotage the global economy? That's basically all that it comes down
Well,
to.
Veblen's point was it was the financial sector that sabotaged industrial
Yeah,
capitalism. It's the financial sector that seeks to make its gains financially, capital gains, corporate rating, living in the short run, paying out profits as quickly as it can instead of reinvesting the profits in long-term investment like the German banks were doing. So it was the shift of industrial capitalism to finance capitalism that ended up destroying industrial capitalism and leading to deindustrialization. And
yeah,
Veblen was pointing on that the American economy was turned into a rentier economy, largely on real estate, because 80% of bank loans are for real estate. And the effect of increasing the loan to value ratio is you lend more and more money against any given property and or home or office building, and the effect is to constantly inflate real estate prices. Well, the financial sector gained enough power over the government by able to make mortgage interest the primary financial return, along with monopoly rent. So you have land rent and monopoly rent being the objectives of finance capitalism, not industrial profits. And so the finance sector took the lead against classical economics. And the fight against classical economics was very much like that of the Roman Church against early Christianity. The whole idea of classical economics and a free market, from the French physiocrats to Adam Smith to John Stuart Mill to Marx, all the way up to Veblen, was a free market is one free from the landlord class and its land rent, free from monopolies and the monopoly rent, and free from predatory banking and its interest, which was a form of monopoly rent, because banks had the monopoly of being able to create money and credit with government banking. And so the power of as the financial sector took over governments, moving towards the apotheosis that you have in America since the Supreme Court Citizens United case, essentially privatizing the election process by saying anybody can fund elections. You have a shift of politics to favor the financialization of the economy, which in turn favors land rent, monopoly rent, and interest. And also the financial class have become the major donors to the universities, especially the business schools, and they've backed an economic curriculum that rewrites all of economic history as if it's all individuals. Well, international banking began when merchants wanted to lend money to handicraft people who were who were exporting to people weaving cloth, and it was all part of business, and it was all very productive. No discussion at all over the fact that that wasn't what created banking. It was war lending that was the
yeah.
business of the international banking class, because this is not a private enterprise approach to history. So you have part of the financialization of the economy taking over the industrial aims of increasing labor productivity, raising wages, increasing the internal market. You have just the opposite. You have more and more income siphoned off in the form of these various forms of economic rent, and less and less available for personal spending, the internal market, and private new capital investment. So that's basically the dynamic. But this has gone hand in hand with an ideological airbrushing of history, so that when I went to graduate school 60 years ago, we not only had the history of economic thought, where you knew what Adam Smith really wrote and the rest of the people. I wrote my book, the J is for Junk Economics, on how the vocabulary has changed, and
Hmm.
we had economic history. And even though the economic history wasn't what I wrote about, at least it was economic history, and you knew that you had a long-term approach, and you realize that markets are shaped by government, by society, by public policy, and that there's no room to analyze that in the libertarian
Yeah. There's
neo.
like the irony that like the creation of markets and all these things that are like the bedrock of like libertarian theory are all government creations. They're all public goods. Like a corporation is a public good. Markets in general are public good. Like that these things didn't emerge from voluntary individuals, but were like state projects.
Right.
Yeah. That's like an irony that's very difficult for the libertarians to see, but it's
But that's the neoliberalism. That's how economists are brought up with a tunnel vision.
mhm.
And that's the problem. They don't see that there is a role of government because the financial sector wants to take over government and dismantle it and make what used to be government, including all of the public enterprises and the natural public monopolies uh, uh, and the election process, all part of the financial sector, not part of the political sector.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see. Hopefully things get better, but it's going to be a long road ahead. I think you know that, right? Like, how do we get people, how do we change this view on economics en masse? How is it even possible when all of the institutions are effectively captured by the most powerful interests in the world to teach
Well,
the
the only
exact
way that
opposite?
I could do it is by writing my books. And
Yeah.
yet, no publisher has come and offer and been eager to publish my books. So they're all done by my research foundation, and they're published in China. I have a Chinese
The
group
Chinese, yeah.
that translate my books into Chinese. So obviously, this idea is very popular there because they have a
Yeah.
mixed public-private economy, and they're open to this idea. And other countries translate the books, but there's very little English language discussion of this. And so there's no market for publishers to write books like this because how do you fit the ideas that I've just described into the academic curriculum? Who's going to, it's not going to be in the
Well,
economic
according,
courses because there's no economic history anymore.
yeah, that's
Maybe it'll be the
anthropology.
literary
Yeah,
courses, but I don't
literature,
think I'm
yeah.
going to win a literary prize for this. No, 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 people don't know how to characterize this approach
Yeah.
just explained in the last 45 minutes.
Well, it's the approach that me and my listeners are a big fan of. So keep up the good work. Thanks for letting me talk to you, man. It's been a dream of mine for a while. And get some rest,
Thank
Stay
you. I
strong,
look
stay
forward to
healthy.
what your group comments on, what they see in all of this.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Peace out.